humanity's struggle to deal with the impact of climate change, whether it is adaptability or mitigation, climate finance has proven to be a potent tool. Climate finance is the money that implements the policies and the lofty ideals that we have enshrined in many of the agreements and international treaties on climate change. To discuss this, I am joined by Ms. Kashmala Kakakhel, who is a climate finance expert and who has advised the government of Pakistan on a variety of matters concerning this. Kashmala, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Kashmala, I wanted to start off with the very basics because a lot of people don't understand climate finance. I know it's something, as a novice myself in this area, it's something that is critical to Pakistan, to our survival as a country which is so badly affected by climate change. So someone who's hearing this for the first time, how would you define or help somebody understand what climate finance is and how it plays a role in the global climate negotiations that we're having right now?
Sure. So let's start from the basics, and as we go forward, I would like to not just take this opportunity to move away from the basics. The understanding that we generally have, I would like to really now, us as Pakistanis, younger generation, think about how we can utilize this in a much bigger way. Let me start with the basic first.
Absolutely.
Climate finance. Let's break it one at a time. When you talk about climate, it basically means that there are two challenges that you're facing that you want to address. One is what is causing climate, it's the emissions.
Okay.
So one, you want to reduce the emissions. That in our jargon is called mitigation. You just want to reduce the emissions that you're causing. So developed countries are causing, developing countries primarily from the different emissions different activities that humans do lead to emissions. The other action is, while we want to reduce our emissions, the impact still already is in the air, which means that disasters will happen, which means that people like you and I need to adapt to it.
Okay.
Which means better flood protection, which means better resilience if there's a drought in Tharparkar, etc.
So dealing with new problems, trying to prevent those from happening, and dealing with the current existing problems that we have, that's adaptation.
And hence the terminology. So mitigation and adaptation.
Absolutely.
So in order to address climate, it's this two-pronged approach that we have. And climate finance then means money to actually act upon these two areas.
I see. All right.
Yeah.
All right. No, that's I think the best simplified definition that you could give. And where are we with, say, global negotiations on this? Because we hear about climate finance, and we hear about it in the news. Then we hear about it in relation to Trump withdrawing from a lot of that's happening globally. But where do we locate or identify the location of this particular climate finance discussion internationally?
So let's go back in history a little bit. When this entire conversation started up about, look, we as humans are creating we're contributing to the emissions, and that's will lead to catastrophic changes in the future. I'm speaking about the early 90s, or even before that, when the IPCC science started talking about the excess GHG emissions in the air. So governments then started taking it seriously because they saw the writing on the wall. And when in the 90s, the whole climate negotiations were set up, what we call the UNFCCC. So the UN has 19 arms. They look at health, education, development, UNDP, what have you. In that, they then started the climate vertical, early 90s. And at that time, when you look at the article itself of what countries signed off to the convention, it has an article on finance, sure. But at that time, the idea really was to try and understand what the problem is. So there was a lot of focus for the first 10 years just on mitigation.
Okay.
So it was about the carbon emissions, who's causing it, is it true? There was a lot of debate around the issue itself.
And dealing with the skepticism.
All of that. Okay, sure. So by then, we moved on to an era, say early 2000s, when within the negotiations, you realized we can keep talking about mitigation and we can keep talking about who's caused it. When the developed countries may or may not be agreeing to what their fault was, the developing countries started saying, look, we are being impacted. No matter what you say, adaptation needs to be mainstream in this negotiation process. So there are floods, there were studies on globes thinning out. A lot of research was coming through which clearly showed that while we keep talking, there is some reality on ground that needs to be looked at. So you saw so finance was always in the background. There was always conversation around like I said, mitigation earlier, and then conversation in the negotiations moved really to the adaptation area. And I think by then, by 2 decades of negotiations, people were quite fed up, and then they started bringing up finance.
Okay, wow.
Who's going to foot the
Because
bill?
finance is the implementing.
Exactly, like,
Okay. Without finance, you're not getting anywhere.
Sure, exactly. We can keep talking about the fact that, climate emission, the emissions need to be reduced.
I see.
Excellent, but who's going to reduce it? How is it going to be reduced? So there was another thin layer in that, which I would like to come at later, was really technology.
Okay.
So there's 2 pillars to it. Either, so you need to improve your technology to reduce your emissions, and then who's going to fund it? So the conversation at that time was really taken over by financing. And you may have heard of the big $100 billion figure that people keep quoting.
Absolutely.
Which actually came out of thin air back in 2009 when Obama was leading his delegation, where we thought we were going to have a big breakthrough, and it didn't really happen. The negotiations broke down in a bunch of different ways, but just to salvage, this number was thrown in the air. And that said, by 2020, $100 billion annually to developing countries for mitigation and adaptation actions.
Okay, so this was a fiction really, at that time, to build some sort of consensus towards...
Correct. But we didn't really have a deal. So the number came through, but what exactly... So sure, we had the convention, but we didn't really have an agreement on how this money is going to flow, where will it flow. So the conversation then took another 6 years. In 2015 is when we actually had what we call the Paris Agreement now.
Okay, yeah.
And that 100 billion was then embedded into the Paris Agreement, and then of course that talked about how we will start between 2015 and 2020 operationalize the deal. So there's all that legality attached to how this money will flow. But just one footnote over there in terms of how it came out of thin air, and how later on, sitting in 2025, when a new goal was supposed to be established, so the 100 billion was until 2025. And since 2023, these things take a long time. When people sat down and they said, now we need a new goal, everybody was scratching their head, because the baseline for the 100 billion made no sense. Is it from the public sector or the private sector? Is it grant money? Is it loan? Is it equity? What exactly does it constitute? Because our baselines were not clear, it was very difficult to come up with a new number. But the new number now is $300 billion by 2035.
But with this caveat that the same uncertainty applies to where we're getting this money from.
So they have tried to answer that. Okay. So while they're saying, sure, by 2035, it'll be 1.3 trillion, public, private, all the other financial instruments. And within that, there's a subset of $300 billion, which should be public money that needs to go into...
Which is governments
correct.
paying for it.
Correct.
That's really interesting there. To help us understand, what the scale of the problem is. We've thrown out these numbers, 300 billion, 100 billion. People are saying that Pakistan needs, in the tens, if not hundreds of billions of dollars just to deal with the level of, climate catastrophe that's taking place here. Is there any truth to that? Are these sums, they're astronomical, but are they even close to what is needed looking at the scale of the issue?
So 346 billion is one of the estimates for Pakistan.
Wow.
But the devil obviously is in the detail. Let me give you an example. How do you calculate these numbers? Back in 2010, I personally did a study to calculate the damage that the floods of 2010 had caused in my village in Charsadda.
Okay.
And I used what you call a contingent valuation method, in which you basically ask 2 questions. How much are you willing to pay to forego a certain service, and how much are you willing to receive? And suddenly, and this is a standard where you get a 10x difference.
Okay.
Right? How much are you willing to pay to not go to work? And how much are you willing to pay? How much are you willing to receive to not go to work? It completely changes the... And we had a good discrepancy between what that dollar amount is for what that flood has cost them. So one is the physical asset. I should have explained this. So one is physical asset, that my house has been destroyed, all of that, etc. And then the non-economic element. So if you are adding the non-economic losses into what climate change can actually lead to, then the numbers really change. In terms of what you're calculating. So when somebody gives you these numbers, it's very important to ask what's the underlying concept around it. And which is why I want us to graduate what I said earlier, we need to move beyond just thinking around the basics of how much are we receiving versus how much we need, because the world has moved on in terms of how we can actually benefit from the money that's available outside, rather than just thinking how much I need for flood protection and how much is somebody willing to give me because I am impacted by climate change from emissions that somebody else caused. That conversation is quite old, in my opinion, and Pakistanis need to have a very different view on how we go forward on this.
So Kashmala, how do we have that view? What are the steps? Because if we're having those caveman style discussions on iski ye X value hai and this has something else, that isn't going to help us deal with what's going to come and what we're actually facing in the scale of it. So how do we graduate this discussion?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first thing is to realize that it's not a climate finance problem. It's not a climate finance gap that we as a country are dealing with. It's an intermediary gap that we're dealing with.
Okay.
Let me explain with an example. So imagine water reservoir being the climate capital. And imagine the dry farmland being the projects that need money.
Okay.
And so money is available and the need is available. But the canals and the systems are not available for this money to actually move towards the
distribution mechanism, all of that, and
the legal arrangements around it, the governance structures around it, and it's because we're trying to use the old vehicles to solve a new problem.
I see.
Let me double down on that. So you have the World Banks and the ADBs, and so there's the banks who have a very standard sovereign loan capacity to help governments. And then you have the whole ODA, where developed countries say 0.5. Now we know with the whole conflict situation going on, we see the UKs and others reducing it to 0.3 now, from which in fact should have gone up to 0.7. Is that the problem is not going to be solved with sovereign loans, and it's not going to be solved just with ODA financing right now. That's because those were the views we were taking, and it was easier because we were looking at economic development in a linear way that the governments were leading on, and we were looking at development issues, health, education, social inclusion from a development ODA grant-based approach. So the problem that we're dealing with now, such as climate, which cuts across all sectors, which cuts across all economic gains that the government makes in just one flood, you really have to think through this differently. Absolutely.
I was working on a migration issue, and climate-induced migration is another major issue. How do you calculate, the brain drain you get, or the losses you get from people who are moving abroad or moving into your communities or across the world? So I think all of that is a far more sophisticated calculus than perhaps the way we tend to look at it, at least as a layman tends to look at it. So we've heard of the Green Climate Fund. What's been Pakistan's performance with regards? Have we been able to access it? How well do we, get our applications through? Something along those lines. Could you help me better understand, what this is and how countries go about accessing it?
So Pakistan hasn't done a bad job within the developing countries to be able to access the GCF.
Okay.
People will throw numbers around, but India has done this much or Bangladesh has done this much. It depends on whether you're calculating the total quantum or you're calculating the number of projects.
I see.
For me, that's not important anymore. To think, Pakistan has got 10 projects from GCF worth $300 million versus another country, and we can keep going on and comparing. It's what are you using the GCF money as, because it's a technical climate fund to create markets in your country, to create space for domestic climate finance to flow to the right institutions, or to be able to create the right governance systems so that you're not perpetually in need of grants.
I see.
It's really understanding the catalytic nature of a fund like the Green Climate Fund.
I see. Yes.
Let me connect it back to the 100 billion. So people said 100 billion in 2010 we will give through the GCF, right? The GCF is now $40 billion or so. The idea is not that we always misconstrue is this is climate finance, we are a poor country, we are vulnerable, so all the projects we need to get from the GCF should be all grant based. That's not happening. You're not looking at the solution that's in front of you in the right way. Grant is available, but how are you using it smartly to leverage the equity instrument that they have available? How are you able to leverage the concessional loan facility that they have? How are you able to leverage the guarantee instrument that they have available? Absolutely. If we have a myopic view of Pakistan needs $346 billion, regardless of who has calculated and what, I just explained the methodology it's your word against my word at the end of the day. People keep arguing about these things. Not important. What's really important is here is a climate fund fully dedicated to really helping countries think beyond projects, think beyond grants, and come up with solutions that will ultimately create markets for the right financial instruments in your country. What stops you from having a municipal financial system? What stops you from creating local venture capital? What stops you from, we've heard the word green banking so many times that it's really been relegated to a very basic understanding, which is why there's so much more we can do with our banking system. Absolutely. What's stopping us from rethinking our microfinance in this country, right? How do you incentivize a system through the kind of programs you submit to the funding opportunities that you have available? And the reason why I'm zeroing in on the GCF is because it's not tainted with, it's not an old vehicle. Okay. To solve a new problem. It's a new vehicle with problems of its own because it's a new vehicle. Yeah. It's trying to solve a problem much beyond anybody's capacity to understand. But at least it's giving you that catalytic support. But you need to be smart enough to anchor it in the right way, to leverage it for something that you create at the domestic level.
That makes a ton of sense. Just to play the devil's advocate here, at times I think there are people who in Pakistan will say, look, we suffer from these routine floods that come in. They're so devastating. 33 million people were affected in 2022. We have tens of millions affected every 2-3 years. Trying to create this complex market system or something along those lines might be too advanced. We need things to save humanitarian relief or something like that. Shouldn't money go towards supporting those? Is there an answer to that?
Yes.
Okay.
So the answer to that is a simple one. We need to going out and playing the vulnerability card, right? So there's 150 other countries equally vulnerable, somewhere there, right? The way we need to frame this and look at it from the lens of adaptation, the flood example that you just gave, we need better flood protection. It's not a vulnerability issue. It's an economic necessity issue. So one flood wipes off X% of your GDP. Yeah. You as a country, as the Ministry of Finance, together with the Ministry of Climate Change, now you need to look at both of these things together. Look at it as, if I'm putting money in adaptation from my own pocket, what am I doing? I am securing my future GDP. I'm securing my future taxes. I'm securing my asset value. Yeah. Right? So it's no longer, I'm vulnerable, please help me. It's rethinking how you spend your own money so that you're protecting your own assets and your future financial flows from within your own systems. That's a critical angle that we need to rethink. And the other thing that we need, I'm seeing generally the convergence, the conversation that we're now seeing is climate and debt conversations are now being clubbed together. Okay. So countries saying, look, we're vulnerable, that was yesterday's news. What countries are now saying is, we are being impacted by climate, but it's adding to our debt burden. Yeah. Right? So the conversations now need to happen in other rooms, rather than saying, how can the climate change fund help me reduce my vulnerability and give me grants to put up a protection wall. It's really thinking beyond the basics and looking at it as an economic necessity, and looking at the challenge that you have when it comes to debt and how you can have the right insurance mechanisms in place. We've spent a lot of time over the last 10 years at least talking about disaster risk financing.
Okay.
So we think that either we can manage disasters from our own pocket, or we can ask somebody to foot our bill. But then there are mechanisms in place where you can transfer your risk, right? You have these contingency plans in place with insurance and reinsurance companies. The problem is Pakistan doesn't work on the risk transfer mechanism. It either absorbs the risk itself, which means money that they put for, say, education or health or whatever, they will use that for emergency, or they will go directly to an appeal. That's the residual risk. I can't do anything, help me. But there's a whole layer in the middle, what is referred to as the risk transfer mechanism, which you put in place before a disaster. Should a disaster happen, it's insurance, how we insure our car or life insurance, etc. And there are instruments out there, and we've been trying to work on these over the last 10 years or so with the government in various capacities. But, looking...
And sorry, Kashmala, just to interrupt you here. This type of insurance, is this insurance that individuals, companies, organizations take out, private sector takes out, or is this, the state can take out?
The state.
Okay, wow.
So disaster risk financing, insurance is just one part of it. So,
of course.
People. So in different pockets, we've worked on crop insurance.
Okay.
Or livestock insurance. So while the state or a government entity, like I spoke about municipal finance earlier, so somebody who creates a private structure around it, where, say, for example, somebody who has wants to insure their crop will be willing to pay a certain amount because he has seen what the flood did to his crop last year and the year before, and will be happily willing to be subsidized in some sort of a format or a relationship with the government where you're not giving out cash grants, but you have a system, a private sector system in place where insurance plays. There have been so many models, it's just that they haven't been taken to scale. Secondly, your NICL, your National Insurance Corporation Limited. So the NICL is supposed to insure government property, roads, railway, your entire infrastructure. Your government is not in your structures are not insured. I don't know the numbers. I had done a study on this earlier, but the numbers escape me. The entity that's supposed to insure is not insuring. So imagine if, as part of the disaster risk financing strategy, the government thought smarter and said, each time I have to build a road or a system, network, whatever, why don't I ensure that NICL has the capacity to ensure X, Y, and Z infrastructure, so that I don't have to keep paying from my ADP and from my PSDP every time there's a flood. You have NICL, then you have a PRCL. You also have a reinsurance company. And then that is backed by, obviously, international reinsurers. So you have a system in place where you only thought about it from a very strict insurance perspective, where generally in Pakistan we don't have an insurance culture, right?
Absolutely.
But now, like I said, new problems. So while you have this old vehicle which could be repurposed to solve your problem, in the longer term, part of disaster risk financing.
Wow. No, that's I mean, there's so much that I'm learning here, but it's it makes a lot of sense. Kashmala, I wanted to ask you, many of the discussion, many of the items you've discussed today are frankly new to me, because whenever we talk about climate finance, it's always this person's lost crops, that person has lost cattle, this person's house has been destroyed, give them a grant, give them some access to funds so that they can help themselves out. But you're talking about a far more advanced or far more sophisticated way of looking at it, where the individual is invested in, or he has mechanisms, an ecosystem really, that protects him from the risk that is available there. And that is part creation of a marketplace where investors, private sector, and all of these entities, banks as well, can come in. But it's also, I think, about having the capacity to deal with these issues, right? And capacity within the state, but also the private sector. Do you feel we have a serious capacity gap? And if so, what are the areas where we need to be building our capacity in this issue?
So the capacity gap exists, which is, true for any thing that we would like to look at, because, you set your aspiration high, depending on where you want to set that. But the ability to identify that a capacity gap exists within which realm. So if we're still focused on, for example, we don't write good proposals to the GCF to bring more grant money into Pakistan, and that's the problem we're trying to solve for, where you will always have international consultants coming in and helping you write these proposals because you think that's the problem you want to solve for. And even within that, I feel there is no knowledge transfer. You generally have, and it's true for even these large multilateral institutions, multinational banks. They just, and it's maybe that's how they're designed, where capability capacity is not provided to your national offices.
I see.
So all of that is kept in your headquarters, and that's true for almost all of them, I can easily say. So again, if you want to solve for the basic problem, within that the capacity exists around understanding how you want to create, what does the solution look like. So nobody thinks end to end. Currently you think about, हमने concept note बना लिया. When you look at the concept note, it has 3 things on it. I would like to do this, and you're like, have you thought about the financial flow of it? Even if it's just grant money. Have you thought about the legality of it? Have you thought about the institutional structuring of it? Have you really thought about the climate rationale of it? Because what you have on the paper is just a standard development project. Right? How are you going to justify in a world where data is already scarce, and more so for issues related to proving climate change is real? How are you going to justify the climate rationale? Do you have the understanding of how to use proxies of data available from a corresponding district or a country, neighboring country which has better data? Do you have that acumen and that sophistication in just proposal development itself, right? So we can keep arguing, Pakistan is most vulnerable, nobody is giving us the money, but what are you doing to be able to access that? So one is really at that basic level, and the other is where are you setting your aspiration. So given what I've said about how you want to use climate finance to create the right markets and the right systems in place so that you are not wasting your money every time there's a disaster, but the money takes care of itself because you have a system in place. That gap, I'm afraid, is quite wide, and while I see a lot of people wanting to work in this area, I think it's a collective responsibility. It's a collective effort. So it's not a one woman, one man job. Sure, one person can think through, or a couple of people can think through the vision of how we can actually use this to the best of our needs. But then you need collective effort to be able to reach those goals.
No, absolutely, and we've been discussing this in the realm of international law, for example. Pakistan lacks capacity in that field, and this is something I've been, it's a gripe that I have, and I've been ranting on it for years. But it's about creating an ecosystem, right? If you don't have the educational institutions that are able to churn out or develop these individuals who can then find jobs in the marketplace that encourage and nurture this, you're not going to have the capacity that you need. Because ultimately it is people earning a decent living that is going to motivate them to opt for these things. So I think developing that ecosystem becomes a responsibility, that joint responsibility that you mentioned, both the state and the private sector, but also the global community as a whole. Really, how can we transfer this type of knowledge or this skill to Pakistanis here, who can then help develop their thing? Kashmala, I wanted to end. I'm cognizant that you're tight on time, but it's such a fascinating discussion. What does success look like? Have we seen successful models of climate finance being implemented in such a way that it's revolutionized or at least made a major impact, whether across the world or in Pakistan, specific projects, things like that? Could you shed some light on that, please?
So it'll be hard to pick a success story because at the moment we're all in the kitchen.
Okay.
developing countries, everybody's trying to come up with, we have ingredients, we're trying to come up with the perfect
test kitchen.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a test kitchen.
So we are at various stages of experimentation. Some are looking at it from, should I set up an equity fund focused on just funding innovation technology for climate solutions? You're having to deal with people, but that's so risky. Why would I just want to focus a complete equity fund on this issue? So you're having to have a very different conversation over there. You're talking to private sector, capital market, who has a risk return lens, but then you're trying to bring in a climate lens into it, where the risk goes yay high.
Yeah,
right.
absolutely.
So you're then having a completely different negotiation with a vehicle or an instrument that has worked in, say, the tech industry.
Yeah.
You've had unicorns come out through the same process, where you have amazing success stories, the Baikias and whatnots, right? Can you use the same structure to create climate solutions that are not only for Pakistan but exportable?
Okay.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
Can you have a blended finance facility within, and when I say blended finance, what I'm basically saying is, how do you use precious climate finance to reduce the premium on the loans that you give out in the microfinance world?
Okay.
So for example, if you create a case and you say, I am investing, or I want to give out grants to the livestock, I want to give out loans, microfinance loans to the livestock sector in Pakistan, and this will cost, say, 30% of premium. But if you bring 30 or 40% premium, right? But then you create a climate case for it, where you say, this livestock loan that I'm giving to this individual will help him not only improve his yield, but will also reduce methane emissions.
Okay, wow, yeah.
And because I'm reducing methane emissions and I'm contributing to the global goal on reducing GHG emissions, therefore give me a concessionality in the grant or a guarantee that I will use to reduce my premium rate from 40 or 30 to, say, 28 or 27.
Very interesting, yeah.
You're passing that grant support or a guarantee support to that individual who will have more money in his pocket to be able to deal with a disaster or whatever catastrophe ultimately he has to deal with.
Absolutely.
Should that opportunity arise. So, long answer to your short question, we don't have, we may have successful case studies, but I haven't come across those, not in Pakistan, internationally, where, there's always those few cases, few and far between, how communities are trying to use climate money to come up with solutions. There's great examples in what Bangladesh has done for its flood protection, etc. But I feel we're all on a pathway towards success, trying to use the old tools, not vehicles, old tools to help us come up with potential solutions that can be fit for purpose for a climate problem.
Kashmala, thank you so much. This has really been fascinating. It's really given us a far more dynamic understanding of climate finance and really what these issues are. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much. I hope this discussion has been helpful to all of you.